There are goodbyes you expect. You see them coming like storms on the horizon, slow, heavy, impossible to stop. But some goodbyes, some rejections, hit without warning. And those are the ones that leave the deepest wounds. That's how it happened for me. One day, I was surrounded, loved, wanted, needed, or so I thought. And then, silence. Not because I said the wrong thing, not because I changed, but because someone decided I was no longer enough. The worst part wasn't the loss itself. It was what it uncovered in me. That quiet question I thought I had outgrown. What's wrong with me? Rejection doesn't just break your heart. It steals your reflection. You stop recognizing the person in the mirror. I became smaller, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I began shrinking to fit into silence, trying not to be too much, trying not to need too much. Because deep down, I believed, if they left, it must be my fault. I replayed every conversation, reread every message, looked for clues, reasons, anything that could explain the empty space where connection used to be. And when I found nothing, I started filling in the blanks with shame. You're not lovable. You're too complicated. You're easy to walk away from. Those thoughts didn't feel like lies. They felt like conclusions, undeniable, final. I tried to distract myself, stayed busy, smiled in public, posted pictures that looked like joy, but joy wasn't in me, just emptiness. A hollow ache that moved with me everywhere I went. They left and I was left with echoes of laughter that used to fill my phone, of promises that now felt like jokes. And the silence they left behind was louder than any goodbye. It was in that silence that I began to question more than just myself. I questioned God, because if He loved me, why did they leave? Why did He let them? Was I that easy to forget? That unworthy to fight for? I didn't speak those questions out loud, but they lived in me, loud and constant, like a second heartbeat. And in the middle of that ache, in the wreckage of my worth, I didn't just feel abandoned by people. I felt abandoned by God. There's a silence that soothes, the kind that wraps around you after a long day, warm and soft. But then there's this silence, the kind that stings, that echoes, that feels like an answer you never asked for. That was the silence I lived in after they left. I kept waiting for something to break it, a message, an apology, a moment of clarity. But nothing came, only the ache, only the sound of my thoughts unraveling. I'd open my Bible and stare at the pages, hoping something would leap out and rescue me. But the words didn't land. They bounced off a heart too bruised to receive. I prayed, if you could even call it that. They weren't polished prayers. They were exhausted breaths, murmurs of why, whispers of where are you? Sometimes, just silence. Because what do you say when the people you trusted turned away, and God feels just as distant? I remember lying awake one night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, and whispering into the emptiness, if you care, say something. Nothing happened, not right then, and so the silence stayed. Not just around me, but in me, like a scar under the skin, tender, hidden, unspoken. I carried it into every room, into every conversation, into every moment where I wondered if anyone else could see how invisible I felt. That's the thing about rejection. It doesn't just hurt, it reshapes you. You start building walls around the soft places. You stop letting people in. You stop letting God in too. Because if He let you get hurt once, what's stopping it from happening again? I told myself I was fine, that I'd move on, that I didn't need closure. But deep down, I was still holding the wound like proof. See, I'm not worth staying for. I didn't realize it then, but I was mistaking silence for absence. I was mistaking unanswered prayers for neglect. I was mistaking what people did for who God was. And that confusion, it built a wall between me and the only voice that could actually heal me. It's hard to find direction when your sense of worth has been fractured. I didn't notice how lost I had become, not at first, because I was still functioning, still going to work, still smiling at the right moments, still responding, I'm good, thanks. But inside, I was wandering, like someone walking in circles in the middle of a desert, parched, tired, unsure if I was making any progress or just slowly fading under the heat of everything I couldn't say out loud. I wasn't chasing dreams anymore. I was just trying to survive my own thoughts. The weight of not enough became constant, not just in relationships, in everything. Not enough to be chosen, not enough to be kept, not enough to be fought for. And that belief, it seeped into my soul like poison. I didn't try to pray much, didn't ask God to fix it, because deep down, I didn't think I deserved his attention. I started comparing myself to everyone, to people whose lives looked full, to women who seemed secure, to stories that didn't end in abandonment. And the question haunted me, what do they have that I don't? I wasn't angry, just tired, exhausted from trying to convince myself that I mattered when nothing in my life seemed to echo that truth back to me. I filled my silence with distractions, noise, scrolling, anything to avoid the voice in my head repeating the same sentence. You are forgettable. It's a cruel kind of wandering, not physical, but emotional, spiritual. When you're moving, but going nowhere. And the desert I was in, it wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of identity. I didn't know who I was anymore without the validation I used to breathe like oxygen. I had mistaken their acceptance for my worth, and when they withdrew it, I believed I had lost me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't feel yet, was that the desert wasn't the punishment. It was the beginning of something holy, of something healing. But first, I had to learn how to stop listening to the voices that broke me and make space to hear the one that could bring me back to life. Deserts don't speak loudly. They whisper, but you don't hear it at first. Not when you're still raging against the silence. Not when your heart is busy rehearsing everything that went wrong. I spent so long trying to escape the desert of rejection, trying to climb out, run past, pretend I hadn't been dropped into it. But one day, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, because I was too tired to keep pretending. I remember it clearly. It was one of those days where nothing felt right, even the light through the window annoyed me. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, head in my hands, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't try to fix it. I just sat, in the discomfort, in the question, in the ache, and slowly, beneath the chaos of my thoughts, beneath the static of my shame, I felt something. Still, it wasn't a feeling, wasn't comfort, wasn't hope. It was presence. I almost missed it. Because I wasn't looking for God in that moment, I was just looking for air. But somehow, in that exact space in the middle of nothingness, in the place I thought he had abandoned, I sensed him. He wasn't fixing me. He wasn't saying anything. He was just there. And in that presence, I began to hear something new. Not words exactly, more like a recognition, a spiritual remembering. I am still here. Not because I earned it, not because I was strong, but because he never left. The desert hadn't been a punishment. It had been an invitation to slow down, to stop striving, to let go of every voice that wasn't his. It was in the stillness, in the sand, in the absence of applause and validation, that I began to hear the only voice that could heal what rejection had broken. And the miracle wasn't that the desert disappeared. The miracle was that I started to listen. I always imagined that if God were to speak to me, it would sound big, loud, clear, something unmistakable, something that would make the ground shake and erase every doubt in a moment. But when the voice came, it wasn't thunder, it was a whisper, and what it said didn't sound like anything I had heard before, because I was used to voices that critiqued, voices that judged, that reminded me of everything I wasn't. But this one was different. It didn't say, "You should have known better." It didn't say, "If you were stronger, they wouldn't have left." It didn't say, "This is your fault." Instead, it spoke the opposite of every lie I had believed. Words like, "You're still mine. You were never disposable. This place is not your grave, it's where I'm growing you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't even frequent, but it was steady, and I started to lean in, not because I was confident, but because I was starving for truth, for something that didn't make me feel like a mistake, for something that didn't shift when people did. That voice began to untangle the narratives I had wrapped around my worth. Each time I expected condemnation, it offered compassion. Each time I expected shame, it extended shelter. Each time I braced for distance, it drew close. And slowly, I began to realize the voice that heals doesn't sound like the ones that broke you. It doesn't mock your pain. It doesn't minimize your ache. It doesn't hurry your healing. It stays. And that's what undid me. Not a sermon, not a miracle, not a moment of supernatural ecstasy. Just a whisper in the desert of my rejection saying, "I see you. I still choose you. And I'm not going anywhere." At first, listening felt dangerous, because the last time I opened my heart to someone's voice, I got left behind. I got hurt. So when I started sensing God's whisper, I flinched, not out of rebellion, but out of self-protection. What if I misunderstood him again? What if I built my trust only to be let down again? But he was patient. He didn't rush me, didn't demand, didn't scold. He just kept whispering. And little by little, I stopped running from the sound. I'd sit in the quiet of my room, where rejection once echoed loudest, and let his words land. Sometimes I couldn't even respond. I just listened to the truth I was too afraid to believe. You are loved without performance. You are not broken beyond repair. Your rejection is not your identity. It wasn't always easy. Some days I still braced for the worst, expecting him to withdraw, to change his mind, to get tired of my slowness. But he never did. His voice didn't grow cold. It grew closer. And the more I listened, the more I began to recognize when it wasn't him speaking. When shame tried to sneak in, I could tell that's not his tone. When fear tried to convince me I'd never heal, I heard his correction. Fear doesn't get to narrate your future. When memories of rejection whispered, "You'll always be the one they leave," his voice said, "I never left." Listening became an act of rebellion against everything I had believed about my worth, not because I got louder, but because I got still. And in the stillness, I realized this voice, the one I almost missed, was the only one that had ever told me the truth without needing me to earn it. I was being rebuilt, not through effort, but through presence, through truth, through love that didn't flinch at my mess. The same desert where I once wandered aimlessly was now the holy ground where I was learning to listen again. Without fear, there comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you realize the names you gave yourself were never yours to carry. The one who was left, the one who wasn't enough, the afterthought, the failure. For so long, I let rejection write my identity, not intentionally, but slowly, subtly. Every goodbye etched itself deeper into how I saw myself, until one day, I stopped repeating the stories that broke me, not because I forgot them, but because I finally met a voice stronger than them. The voice that said, "You are not what they did. You are not what they said. You are not what they walked away from." That voice didn't erase the pain, but it rewrote the meaning of it. I started seeing the rejection for what it really was: redirection, not to lesser things, to holy things, to a deeper intimacy with God, to a version of myself I would have never met had I been kept where I once begged to stay. And as I healed, I stopped rehearsing my loss and started remembering his presence. The desert didn't disappear, but it changed. It became sacred. It became still. It became full of clarity, of truth, of him. I started to dream again, not about relationships, but about wholeness. I no longer needed people to choose me to feel chosen, because I knew I was never truly abandoned. I was being drawn away from what couldn't carry me, drawn out of noise, drawn into the place where my soul could finally breathe. And now, when I think about who left, I don't feel anger, I feel release. Because the desert taught me to stop chasing people who couldn't see me and start listening to the one who never stopped speaking. If you're standing in your own desert right now, if the silence feels louder than your prayers, if you've been left behind by people who once promised they'd stay, I want you to hear this. You are not forgotten, not by God, not by the one who created your heart and still holds every cracked and bruised piece of it. Rejection may have shaped your pain, but it does not define your future. Because even in the driest place, even in the silence that follows abandonment, he still speaks. You may not hear him at first. You may mistake his quiet for absence. You may look around at the emptiness and think, this is where the story ends. But what if this is where it begins? What if the desert isn't your punishment, but your invitation? What if the silence isn't rejection, but preparation? What if the ache is just the clearing of space, so that when he whispers, you finally hear him, not through noise, not through approval, but through truth, the kind that says, you are mine, still. You are seen, still. You are loved, still. Let that voice be louder than the one that walked away. Let his words root deeper than the lies you've repeated. And when the desert stretches long, when healing feels slow, remember, even here, he is not silent. Even here, he is speaking. So lean in, be still, and listen, because the voice that heals is already calling your name.